Let you know when it's all ready to go.
Yeah.
And takes a few seconds. Also, you guys should know there's always a 20 to 30 seconds delay between the, if you want to keep it up, you should mute it. Otherwise, you're going to have, just mute the YouTube.
Right, yeah.
Otherwise it's gonna do an echo. If you just mute that the YouTube page, you're fine. You just can see the chat without. So
I think I have it up. I don't think
so. I'm gonna say bye, have fun, and see you guys later. I'm gonna make Kari the host.
I'm hearing something. What is that?
it's feedback from somebody.
Oh,
And just make sure your YouTube chat, your YouTube page, if it's up, it's muted. You should be okay.
okay.
Okay. See you guys later.
Alrighty. We'll give everyone a minute or two to come in and assemble themselves and watch. Kari, I like your background very much.
You, David. Thematically appropriate.
I know, I have background envy. All right, well, I'll start. If people continue to wander in, I don't mind them wandering in the middle of my talking. It's fine. So hello, everyone. My name is David Demchuk. I am one of the fresh, new, young programmers at CanCon. And I'd like to welcome you all to today's panel, Tales from Home, Drawing on One's Heritage, History, Culture, and Folklore to Create Genre Fiction. First, I'd like to say a few words about CanCon. The convention has been running in Ottawa for the last decade, though it has been around for quite a bit longer than that. Until recently, CanCon was a physical event held over a weekend in the fall. Now, because of reasons, CanCon is hosting a series of virtual events throughout the year. It's a way of keeping the community together, to give ourselves chances to see each other and to keep the conversations flowing and to re-energize ourselves. Overall, our goals are to uplift science fiction, fantasy, and horror writers, to let readers know who the new and exciting authors are out there, and to bring them face to face with some of the people who they should be reading. We also aim to explore subjects that move past the 101 level topics we find at other conventions, and that in some cases connect across our subgenres in order to enrich our work and find common ground within the spectrum of speculative fiction. Tonight's panel is a perfect example of that. I'd like to give a quick shout out to my co-programmer for this event, Aaron Rockfort, our webmaster and tech wizard, Marco Caltrera, our chat moderator, Courtney Fernandez, and the rest of the CanCon team near and far, wherever they are. Now it's time to pass things over to our esteemed moderator, Kari Marin, who in turn will introduce the panel and get things going. Thanks once again for joining us. Take it away, Kari.
Thank you, David. And hello, everybody on YouTube and elsewhere. I suppose it's just YouTube. And also the panelists. Hello, I have a migraine, so I may be a little weird tonight. Anyway, I am your moderator for tonight. And what I think that we should start by doing is by introducing each of the panelists, which I'll let the panelists do themselves. I'll just mention before we do that, that this panel itself is, in case you were wondering, about legends, mythology, and folklore, and the way that writers and other people draw on them for inspiration and possibly subversion in their work. And we'll be looking at a number of different aspects of this particular topic, and starting with sort of the broad outlines of it and then narrowing it down to specific things. So I'd like to start just by asking everybody for a short introduction. And I'll tell you, first of all, who the people are, just their names. We've got Sonia, we've got Katie, we've got yes, wave to the nice people. Wave to them. We've got Wobgijik and we've got Tanya. And then we've got David lurking in the corner with his mask on, watching us all. So maybe I will ask the first person to, I'll just say, panelists, when you have something to say during the panel, if you could just put your little hand symbol up. There's a little hand symbol that you have in the bottom there. Yes, like that, like Katie's doing right there. And that will tell me that you want to say something. There's also a little party symbol that Katie has up for us today because she wants to, and a laugh cry emoji. She is demonstrating all of the emojis. So because Katie is being so vocal with emojis, at least, I will ask her to start. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Kari. Hi, everyone. My name is Katie Brisky. I'm a fantasy author, podcaster, and co-chair of the Ephemera reading series. So my interest in folklore, legends, myth, it's the thing I always seem to come back to, both as a reader and a writer. It's just the thing that seems to speak to me and gets my imagination going, whichever side of the page I'm not coming at it from. So I'm very much looking forward to the panel and looking forward to conversing with such great authors.
Right, thank you, Katie. How about Wob Gishik? What about you next?
Hi, everybody. Good evening. My name is Wabagijik Rice. You can call me Wob for short if you're like in conversation. I'm a Sudbury, Ontario-based author. Sudbury is the traditional territory of Atikamekw Anishinaabeg. I'm originally from Wasauksing First Nation near Parry Sound, Ontario. I'm of mixed Anishinaabe and Canadian descent, and I'm currently a writer of speculative fiction. My most recent novel is called Moon of the Crested Snow. It's a post-apocalyptic / dystopian story about a Northern Ontario First Nation, and I'm currently writing the sequel to Moon of the Crested Snow. I would say my traditional stories from my people, the Anishinaabe Nation, have greatly inspired all of my writing up until this point. The stories I heard as a child really influenced and informed my understanding of the world and of being Anishinaabe specifically. And I try to factor in those stories and that learning and that knowledge into everything I write nowadays. And I find it particularly interesting to adapt some of those stories and use them in speculative fiction. So I'm very, very honored, very happy to be amongst you all tonight, to see some familiar faces as well. And Chimigwesh, just very thankful.
Okay, thank you. Tanya, how about you go now?
Sure. My name is Tanya Liber. I am Canadian born, but with Caribbean heritage and a multiracial heritage. I write mostly science fiction, fantasy, and horror. And I write some literary fiction, but the thing that I tend to focus on in my literary work is mental health issues, which is something I'm passionate about. And I'm really glad to be here.
All right, thank you. And Sonia, take it away. Take us home.
Well, hi, everybody. My name is Sonia. I write under SM Carrière. I'm a speculative fiction author. I write mainly fantasy, but a little bit of horror and sci-fi and historical fiction as well. And I am a Celtic studies nut. I studied it in university, and I absolutely adore the world, both the actual archaeological realities of the Celtic culture, but also all the stories that came with it. So that's generally where I come from in my writing. You'll see very Celtic motifs sneak their way through, even if it's not intended.
Okay, excellent. And I will just add very briefly, my name is Kari. I put folklore in my writing all the time, and I'm an academic, so I may get a little bit incomprehensible at some point tonight. Let's begin with just kind of the broad topic itself. I'm just going to ask you a general question about how you incorporate folklore, folk tales, mythology, cultural history, folk tradition, legend, any of that stuff into your work itself. Just as a, for instance, do you find that you tend to create whole fantasy worlds based on certain mythologies, or do you work folklore into real world stories set in the present, the past, or the future? What is your jam where this topic is concerned? How about we start? Does anybody want to go first, or shall I cruelly choose someone? I will cruelly choose Wob to start with.
Oh, so cruel, Kari. I would say to answer the last part of your question, that I incorporate the folklore into everyday, present day scenarios. And what I mostly try to weave in are some of the stories I heard as a kid, as I mentioned in the intro. In Anishinaabe culture, we have what are called Nanabush stories. And I think we're familiar with a lot of indigenous cultures having like a trickster figure. In Anishinaabe culture, that trickster is named Nanabush. And that's actually a derivative of another sort of more serious character in our stories called Nanabojo. And that's considered like one of the first people on Earth, right? So that figure is sort of reworked into more kids related stories. And he sort of moves through the lands, I guess manipulating the land. You know, he has like magical powers. There are creation stories that are related to him. So there are purely fantastical elements to all those Nanabush stories. And I grew up hearing those from like my early childhood. So that always sort of, invoked a sense of wonder in me. And when I began writing creatively, like as a teen and into my 20s, I think that really inspired me to sort of, I guess, get a little surreal, but also step outside of the real world and, take some of those things and bring them back into the real world at the same time too, right? So that's pretty much exactly where my main writing inspiration comes from, is some of those trickster stories I heard as a kid.
Excellent. How about Sonia next?
Oop, there we go. Thank you. Sorry, I just hit mute again after you unmuted me. Most of the time it's unconscious. I will read something about folklore that sort of sits in the back of my mind, and then it will weave its way into stories. There have been very few stories I've written that were very deliberately invoking folklore. Most recent one is a manuscript for I finished the first book, currently writing the second book for a series that deals with the Fomorian and Tuatha De Danann War, but sort of advancing on for that. So it's a portal fantasy where some young kid gets ported into this world where the Tuatha De Danann and the Fomori, once bitter enemies, have united in a last-ditch effort to save their own world from another invading force. So that is one of the few stories I have that pulls directly from and uses the names that you find in folklore and mythology. Everything else just kind of weaves its way in. Sort of people in the know will know, oh, hey, that's that thing, but it's never explicitly mentioned except for in this particular series. Oh, and also my computer is ancient, so I don't have a hands up thing on my Zoom. This will be my hands up if you don't mind. Okay, thanks.
That totally works. Or you can use any symbol that is not just a blank space. How about Tanya go next?
I tend to integrate my folklore and fantasy into the real world. For example, the story that I wrote that got longlisted for the Carter V. Cooper Award in 2015, it's called Through Dreams She Moves, and I incorporated my fantasy into that, and I included some history that resembled my own family history. For the other one that I did, most of them are like that. The only exception is a story I'm working on where I'm actually where it's a future, it's a near future science fiction story. And I have to do a whole bunch of world building. And the next exception, and that is probably going to end up being a book because that's what everyone says it is. And the other one is actually a novel, and I am pantsing it. So anything that looks like it may fit into, or it seems to be shiny, I incorporate it in. So those are just the two exceptions. But for the most part, in most of my short stories, I integrate my folklore into the real world.
And Katie.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm similar, I think, to Wab and Tanya in that way. It's more integration of folklore into real world. I don't often do a ton of secondary world fantasy. So for the first part of your question about making up a whole world based on folklore, I'm less likely to do that. But what I've realized about myself is I actually like playing with like pieces of folklore, like the tropes and the motifs, rather than retelling, say, a story in its entirety. So it's almost more like I'll take an interesting bone from a story and I'll maybe spin it around and turn it inside out and then combine it with this bone over here. So I end up with like kind of a weird Frankenstein creature of a story in the end. But I mean, that's what I find fun. I feel like if I was an academic, like you'd be writing essays, right, about contrasting and playing these different folk tales against each other. But alas, I am not an academic in quite the same way. So that's how I do it. That's how I put them against each other is kind of by smashing them together within a story. What I've realized too is it's not just those story elements. It's not always just the motif itself that I like to play with. It's also things like plot beats, right? And sort of the more metafictional pattern and the tone. So I like to combine all of those bones into, a Frankenstein story.
Well, it is worth saying that folk tales are kind of Frankenstein stories. They are stories in which many motifs have been mashed together in many different configurations, and you can track those motifs all over the world, which is what's interesting about it. And from listening to what all of you were saying together, we can actually see a kind of pattern beginning to emerge, even now at the beginning of this little discussion. In that some of you are looking at more specific cultural approaches to folktales, whereas some of you are doing it a little bit more broadly. Katie's interest is in the bones of folklore, whereas some people are a little bit more interested, I guess you could say, in the meat of the creature, of the Frankenstein's monster that we all have courage. Sorry, I'll stop. I'm going to ask this, the longest, most wandering question that I've written down for you all today. An interesting aspect of folklore is that it can be seen as existing on a kind of continuum ranging from the personal to the universal. So on the personal end of the spectrum, we have culture-specific or even family-specific traditions and stories and histories and beliefs. Whereas on the other end, the universal end of the spectrum, we have broader tale types and motifs that can be found across traditions. And then, of course, this is all complicated by the fact that these seeming categories are not mutually exclusive. Something can be simultaneously specific and universal. So maybe talk a little bit about, in your writing or in your life in general, which end of the spectrum are you interested in? Or some of you have begun to answer this question already, but maybe if you have answered it, expand it a little bit. Do you find yourself working from end to end of the spectrum? Do you see one side of the spectrum as more important to you than the other, the personal versus the universal? And if so, what are the implications of that? So there's the academic coming out in me, and now I'll stop. And if no one is raising their hand, I will say, let's start with Tanya this time.
I would say I tend towards the personal. I integrate my experiences with culture and how my culture intersects with the trauma that I experienced as a child, and I explore that a lot in my literary fiction. But I also bring a lot, some of it into my science fiction, and it tends to put my writing into the dark fiction category. A perfect example would be the one that's coming out in Carol Mad 5 in about a couple of months. It's called The Drunken Tree, and I made Richard Thomas's skin crawl. That is an accomplishment for me. I also bring in, I tend to bring in a lot of child abuse issues. And people have told me that the short story that I wrote for Fantasy Magazine, 10 Steps to Wholeness You, the scene where, not to be too spoilery, but the scene where the Suki kills the main character and turns her into one, how it tends to sound like, it feels more like an experience of sexual abuse. And I did not intend that at all, but that's probably an example of me inadvertently bringing in something that I have had a lot of friends experience, and I know personally about, into my fiction. So I would say I tend towards the personal end of it.
All right. How about Sonia now?
Yeah, I also tend towards more the personal, specifically because of my like pseudo-academic, I'm an armchair academic, it's not the same thing, interest in specifically Celtic culture. But there are certain motifs that I've noticed in my very brief survey of other cultures that I am, things like the wild hunt is experienced in very many cultures, and I am obsessed with it. And you will find it in a lot of my fiction in one way or another. The not quite dead culture hero, the sleeping culture hero who will come back one day and save the culture, that happens across a variety of cultures, and you'll find that a lot in my writing. So I guess it would be a mix of the two, but I do tend towards much more the personal in my writing, I think.
So you're rooted in the Celtic, but some of the Celtic stories that you deal with are more universal in their reach.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I would say that's true. Yes. From what I've noticed, I've not made a broad study of it.
No, you're absolutely right, actually. How about Wob?
That's a really interesting question, Kari. And I think, like, from an Indigenous perspective, and this is just my belief, the act of storytelling through folklore by nature, I think, jumps around that spectrum. And, you know, it can go from the deeply personal to the more universal, even within one story, right? And Katie mentioned taking those bones and maybe even rearranging them. Like, when I speak with you all tonight, I'm really only speaking from my particular family and community's perspective, even though I talk about Anishinaabe things, right? The Anishinaabe Nation is vast and very diverse. So I could tell one Nanabush story and then go to another community and hear it told in a totally different way. So those bones have been sort of rearranged, and there are different, maybe another bone will be placed into that, you know, Nanabush Frankenstein, I guess you could say, right? But what really comes through in every single case, in my belief, is that truth, that moral at the end of that story, right? So in Anishinaabe culture, I think the common belief is you can tell that story any which way as long as those bones are there. And at the end, that moral is what the listener or the reader comes away with, right? So in that sense, yeah, I think it goes about that spectrum in different ways. And from a broader Indigenous perspective, I think there are universal stories like that, or universal experiences that are portrayed in different kinds of stories. So I could, for example, you know, hear a Mohawk story that's very similar to something I heard in Anishinaabe culture, right? But told in a different way with different characters and different elements and so on. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting way of looking at that, and just in general.
Thank you very much. And Katie?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think in my own kind of experience writing, I agree with Wob that it jumps around, because, you know, I was kind of jotting down some thoughts, and at first I was thinking, you know, I think I just like see the universal motif like in the specific. So like I had a story in Lightspeed last year, The Bone Stag Walks, which is about a carnivorous skeleton deer. So like fairly specific, but it brings in a lot of more universal motifs like the animal bridegroom. To an extent, there's a little bit of like wild hunt, midwinter folklore. And then as I was thinking more, I was like, no, wait, I think I actually see the personal experiences in the universal, right? So they mirror each other, and they do both at once, and I think they bounce around between. I'm reminded of a different story that was in Apex a while back. It was ostensibly about unicorns, but it was also not a very subtle metaphor for asexuality, and like coming to terms with that. So it does seem to, sometimes both in the same story, just navigate from pole to pole to pole. So yeah, I think my answer, I think you said, you know, do you work from end to end? And I think that is what I do.
Yeah, I think most of you tend to work from end to end. It's interesting to hear the different perspectives on an answer that is actually really the same from person to person. There are both personal and universal elements of any story. And I think that actually leads us to another question. Like, how rigid is your approach to folkloric elements in your work? And this is a loaded question, and it's a really mean question in many ways, because I will, like, let's just say that I do teach fairy tales, and I notice that many of my students get kind of upset when they see more than one version of a story. They're like, but which is the original? Do you have this need to get the folklore right, whatever that means to you, whether there is such a thing as getting the folklore right, or is your approach to it a little bit more flexible than that? So who haven't I started? I think I've started with everybody so far. So I think we're back to starting with Katie again. Sorry, you just answered last, but
I'm back. I'm
Yeah.
back. I feel like for me in professor questions, a glib answer is usually a trap. So I'm not gonna be glib. I mean, you might have guessed from my answers in previous questions, like I'm fairly free flowing. That's my jam. I'll remix. I'll recombine. I think because that's what actually I love about folklore and legend, is that it does change from telling to telling to telling, and that there can be many true versions of the story. And I'm very much a folklore enthusiast after your heart in that way. But I feel like as long as you respect the story, you're doing it right. So whether or not your ogre has 7 daughters or 10, or plot points happen in a slightly different order, I'm just looking at your beautiful background for inspiration. I think as long as the heart and the spirit, and perhaps the moral, as Wob was saying earlier, of the story is respected, then for me, I feel like I'm doing it right.
Okay, how about we go to Tanya next?
Yeah, that is an interesting question. I think in regards to folklore, if there's certain fundamental tenets of of folklore, for example, say for vampires, you can't have vampire. They need some sort of liquid. So sometimes people will have bunny vampires that, drink vegetables. Or, for example, you turn around with the vampire myth. I mean, even to the point of making them sparkle, which I think that sort of got some sort of, that was sort of laughed at in our community, but for the larger audience, they sort of bought it. And then there was a Frankenstein movie where Frankenstein almost didn't have any scars, but he looked pretty. But the idea was that he had different parts. So if you get the fundamental tenets of what the folklore is about that you cannot necessarily break, you can play around with the other elements. For example, my Sophia turns young, but she starts off as old. That is a fundamental tenet. Sukayans take their skin off. If you don't take their skin off, what's the difference between them and any other Western vampire? So that kind of has to stay. So I think if you get if you have the basic tenets of what the folklore is, I think you can play around with the different elements of it. And that will vary from folklore, story, or character to character. So that's what I think.
All right, that's very interesting. How about Sonia now?
I guess I'm pretty flexible. It depends on the story and what the story demands, because there are some times where, yeah, like Katie said, tearing apart a piece of folklore and then extracting something that you then twist and mold and then mix with this piece from somewhere else, and it becomes this whole different thing. People might still be able to pick up, oh, that's from this, but it's different enough that it doesn't feel like you've disrespected it in any way. And then for other stories, depending on what you're writing, you would have to be much more rigid. So for for the Avalon Wars stories I'm writing, the Portal fantasy, I have to get certain things right. Like I have to get the Fomori right, the Firbolg. I have to get the Tuatha more or less right, and sort of the attitudes there. But I can also draw from my modern experience and from caste systems or caste systems, depending on how you'd pronounce it, sort of to infuse there and give it a newish sort of spin. It really does depend on what the story calls for, but I'm not a folklore purist. I won't pick up like a Robin Hood adaptation and then throw it across the room because it's not the poem, damn it. Like you have to be flexible, I think, to some degree at least, depending on what the story calls for.
It's pretty hard to be a folklore purist because you will never sleep again. It's just there's no way of doing it. It goes
right.
Right. Wob?
Yeah, I think, there's room for flexibility, absolutely. And I'm glad that Tanya brought up like a vampire, like an iconic figure. In Anishinaabe culture, we have the Wendigo, which is like an evil creature that, strikes in the winter when a community is most vulnerable. And, we tell those stories to be fearful of the Wendigo, yet at the same time, there are stories of the Wendigo that paint it as like even a comical figure, like a buffoon sometimes, right? So, that provides the opportunity to take some liberties from a storytelling perspective, but also like, shows the complexity of any and all kinds of figures or creatures in our world today, right? So yeah, as long as like the point it comes across and as like those, I guess, basic characteristics that are universal about those figures are still there, I think it's, okay to, dance around different sorts of details or, change a story to however you want to tell it, I guess, right? Where I do think rigidity is important though, from a cultural perspective, from my cultural perspective, is ceremonial stories. I don't believe those should be really messed with or, put out into the public domain in that way. Like a lot of the stories you'll see and read and hear about Anishinaabe culture, those are considered in the public domain, right? Those are stories we share with our kids. We put them in the books, we put them into videos and so on. But like the ceremonial stories are very revered. And I believe we should be rigid about that and keep those in the ceremonial spaces and not bring them out into the public domain, right? And that's my belief, but I mean, that's informed by my elders too at the same time. So there is a time to definitely be serious about our stories.
Yes, thank you. And that does actually take us a little bit towards the issue of appropriation that was brought up in the little blurb that gave us this particular, sorry, my migraine is taking my words away, that gave us the blurb that gave us this particular topic. What I do find that when I moderate panels, I tend to deconstruct the blurb and start challenging and questioning it. And I think that at this point we can kind of do that. One of the questions that was asked in the blurb was, how do we avoid appropriation? And can we, when using the folklore of cultures not our own? Now, there is an assumption built into that question, which is that we can or should use the folklore of cultures not our own. So maybe we can talk about that a little bit, because that idea of the spectrum we talked about earlier does rely on the fact that there are certain stories and traditions unique to certain cultures and people and sacred to certain traditions and people, stories that belong to a cultural group and should not, in fact, be shared. So sorry again, give me a migraine break. All right, I think I can ask the question now. What can you say either about or in response to the question that the blurb asked? The question, how do we avoid appropriation and can we when using folklore of cultures not our own? Please feel free to challenge this question because it does have some problematic aspects to it. But also let's start talking about appropriation. We do need to. So how about we start this time with Tanya?
Oh, yikes. I may have some trouble articulating this. it may come down to getting it vetted by people in the community. If you're going to do something, say, look, I'm thinking of doing such and such, and this is what I've done. This is the research I've done. And they would say, you know what? I don't think that's a really good idea. Maybe you should try this instead. Maybe this aspect of our folklore or culture. Also, yeah, get it vetted. That is, and treat them. Always assume people are fully fleshed human beings. I am not gay, or I'm not a lesbian. But I had the very first short story that I got published featured a lesbian couple who were having a child through a new scientific process that I described. It was an alternate future in the ancient, in modern Egypt. No one said a word. No one complained. Not a peep. Everyone liked the story. No, that didn't even come up. No one brought it up as a topic. So I must have done something right. You know, treat them like you're the human. Get it vetted. That's all I can think of. I don't know if anyone else can come up with any other ideas.
Wob, you started to talk about this during your last little speech. Could you continue the discussion from there?
Yeah, sure. It's a hugely complicated issue, absolutely. And I agree with Tanya. The best sort of approach would be to request vetting or request another set of eyes just for the sake of respect, right? You know, the truth is anybody can write about whatever they want, absolutely. But if you're going to write about a community that's not your own or a perspective that's not your own, you're directly accountable to that community, you know, and if they read that and they feel it's done improperly or disrespectfully, then they have every right to call you out for that, you know. We hear a lot about, cancel culture or whatever else, but if you take missteps and disrespect somebody, then you're accountable for that, absolutely. So yeah, I would say, don't just go and cherry pick whatever you see from the internet, because people are going to see right through that, especially if you come from a culture that reveres stories so deeply, and from my own, cultural perspective, like stories are what helped us hang on to our identity, during all kinds of brutality, right? Through the Indian Act, through residential schools and so on, and through displacement and all that, right? So yeah, I think first and foremost, the discussion needs to happen. You can't just go and do it outright. You need to talk to somebody from that community to see, if you are doing things, in a good way, in a respectful way. And I get contacted fairly regularly from people asking, can I write about this perspective, or can I write about this story from your culture in my book? And I'll say, well, yeah, like, just tell me what your intentions are. Why do you need that in your story? Like, is it just for the sake of diversity, or is it for the sake of really bolstering your story? Because that is a great storytelling element that will help this overall narrative kind of thing. So yeah, just have an open mind and prepare to be vulnerable, prepare to be challenged, prepare to put your ego on the side, because it is very, very much a collective communal process in the end. Even though we are just like one solitary writer who is putting this forward, I think we're the byproduct of a lot of people coming together to make sure stories are done right. So yeah, again, complicated issue, but just have discussions. That's the best way to approach it.
It's definitely very complicated. Tanya, did you have put up your hand?
How do you put your hand down? Do you press it again? Okay, there we go. In regards to cancel culture is not a thing. It's people not wanting to be accountable for what they do, and other people calling them up on their BS, not to swear online. I mean, on the panel. So that's just my 2 cents on that. Carry on.
No, the whole cancel culture idea is going to rear its ugly head at this point, I think, because it is definitely a way of citing cancel culture as a way of silencing people. How about you, Sonia? Do you have some thoughts?
Well, I'd like to second that cancel culture is BS. Absolutely. What it is people who are not used to being held accountable suddenly getting held accountable. That's what cancel culture is. I don't know. It stresses me out so much. There's a very, very fine line between representation and appropriation. And I do think that if you're going to try and use something from a culture that isn't your own, do get sensitivity readers. And if they come back and tell you, hey, this is a huge misstep, take the L. Don't fight them on it. They know. That's all I've got, because I can't, I'm white, straight-ish person. Like, my privilege is like up here. I don't know if I've misstepped. I'm going to need people to tell me. And if I have, I hope to goodness that I don't get my back up and I've got the grace to say, Jesus Christ, I'm so sorry. Let me walk back on that one. That's all I can say on that. I'm not the person to approach about that. I've never had the problems that other people have had.
Yes. And Katie.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it has been said already. It's clear communication. It's that willingness to be vulnerable and to be humble. It's vetting. It's sensitivity readers. I think for me, the biggest thing comes down to is I don't want to do harm, right? Which makes all of those things like Sonia just said, like take me out. I'm like, well, yeah, but I don't want to do harm. If I'm stepping on your foot, I'd much rather you tell me than continue to stand there. And that's the thing about stories, though, is that they're not just stories. They're not just words. We're writers. We know this. And I think especially the way I tend to work with folklore, which is, the remixing and the taking this bone, it's that thing of you need to know the rules incredibly well in order to break them. And I know my own kind of like cultural stories and backgrounds that well. Cultures that are not my own, I don't. And for me, again, everyone can make their own choice about it, but for me that risk is pretty high. So it would be something that I would approach with a lot of caution and a lot of humility and a lot of communication and also checking of intentions. To the point that was raised earlier, why that bone, I guess, in that particular context. So I think it's a lot of checking in with yourself and checking in with the community around you that you're approaching, frankly, as a guest. So I'm done.
Hooray. No, not hooray that you're done. Just hooray for all of the things that people have said. A party thingy. We have our first audience question, and I'm sorry I didn't say this at the beginning. We are taking audience questions. If you have a question and you're in the YouTube, please, now there's a surprised face. Okay. Please just put your question in the YouTube, and Courtney will text me with the question, and then I will ask it. So this question does in fact relate to the things that we've been talking about. It arises out of them. And it is there a question of retellings or retakes that are subversive? Do those call into question the idea of being truthful to the story? So the idea here is when you are in fact subverting a tradition, does that affect the idea of whether or not you're being truthful to the story, whether or not you're being faithful and getting it right? So is there anybody who would like to start on that one, or should I be the cruel teacher and pick a person? All right, cruel teacher it is. How about Katie, because she's looking contemplative?
Like this? I think to subvert a truth, you need to know the truth that you're subverting, right? It's that thing that was just said about you need to break the rules, or know the rules in order to break them. I think sometimes also breaking the rules helps you know them, so the reverse might work. Yeah, but with the unicorn story that I referenced earlier, it's a huge subversion of that kind of unicorn mythos of purity and virginity and all that. So I almost feel like because it's been subverted, you see that original truth in the mirror reflection, if that makes sense. It's like it becomes the shadow to the story that you're now telling. So it is still present because you're reacting against it. It makes sense in my head. Hopefully it makes sense to the person who asked the question.
I think it makes sense. Wob, how about you?
Yeah, I think it's a question of power dynamics, I guess, especially when there are sort of dominant narratives that, we've all come to learn, in the society we grow up in. Subverting, I think, is an opportunity to insert your own experience or your own culture into, I guess, one of those dominant stories. I don't know if it works the other way around. Like, I've never really considered that and how it applies to my own culture. And I guess that's, goes back to our conversation about cultural appropriation and where that can happen, if at all, right? But, I firmly believe that it can definitely go in terms of challenging like dominance, absolutely. I don't know of any good examples off the top of my head, but that's just sort of my initial thought there.
Sonia, how about you?
I think I'm going to jump off something Katie said there, like right at the end, like a little bell rang in my head. And I think she's quite right. In subverting the folklore, you're reacting against basically the moire that the folklore was originally intending. And in so doing, you're saying, hey, this is the thing, but this is my thing. And in order to understand what your thing is, the reader has to be able to understand what the original thing is. Otherwise, it's not a subversion. It's just somebody telling a story that somebody's like, okay, that's so cool. So yeah, it's definitely there in the reflection, in the, hey, this is, the folklore is saying, this is the truth, but actually, this is my truth. And it might be like diametrically opposed. So in that opposition, you are being true to the folklore. You're just reacting against it. Something like Little Red Riding Hood is the wolf, or something along those lines, right? Because the truth is, as a woman, it can be really super scary out there in the world. And sometimes you gotta become the beast, right? So there's the subversion. The subversion is the folklore is don't go into the woods alone and don't talk to strangers. And maybe your subversion is, hey, become the scary thing. It's sort of reflective of where you stand with what you feel that the original might be saying or might be trying to impart, I think. Did I make any sense whatsoever?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Really, yeah.
I could say
I agree very
Little
much.
Red Riding Hood, but I will not say those things, and I will go to Tonya instead. Tanya?
I have some notes here. Being subversive in a story, it's challenging something in a story, isn't it? Especially like Wobbs brought up, dominant narratives that everyone has come to learn. I'm trying to think. Sometimes being subversive is inserting yourself into the story where you weren't. Like, for example, when Blade came out, that was a huge thing back around 97. I saw, and my personal thing about being inserted into a story was when I saw a cover for a Vampire the Masquerade rulebook, and I saw a Black vampire on the cover, and that got me starting writing my very first novel. But I think for the most part, it's probably challenging some sort of tenet that's being content, that's contentious in the story. And that's all I have to say about it. Very short.
No, short, but very interesting. And concise is good. We have a couple of questions here that are actually related to each other. They may have come from the same person, and I'm going to ask them together. And the questions are, what stories should we not tell? And conversely, what stories do you think need more telling? What's missing from our broader cultural canon? What kinds of innovations should we be doing with our folklore? So what shouldn't we tell, and what should we do more of? How about with this one, we start with Wob?
Really cool questions. to answer the first part, I would say, I would just echo what I said before. Like, I don't think we should tell, the ceremonial stories, right? The, very, the protected stories, the very revered ones. We also shouldn't tell the stories of other people's personal trauma, that those aren't ours to sort of take and sort of rearrange as we see fit. But I think the folklore that definitely needs to come out are, I think, the real histories of folks, that haven't been told in the mainstream. And I think from an Indigenous perspective, here in Canada, like, mainstream society has never really had the full picture about the realities of Indigenous people. But what has kept us going is our realities that have become our folklore, that didn't end up in any history books or anything like that. Those became our history that was passed down from generation to generation. And those were absolute truths, right? Those weren't that wasn't mythology by any stretch of the imagination. So in that sense, I think that's the kind of folklore that we need to hear more of, the real stories of marginalized people that never had a chance to make it into the mainstream spotlight. So yeah, I believe we need to shift our gaze more that way and start documenting a lot more of those stories, and like, for a long time, nobody knew what Africville was, the Black community in Nova Scotia that was, destroyed and displaced, right? But that's part of Canadian history. And now, thanks to those people, embedding that in their folklore and passing it down, that's what real history has become. So that's the kind of folklore I think we need to hear more of.
Yes, absolutely. Tanya, do you have thoughts on this one?
Yes, I do. Things that should be spoken of more of. And this is probably why I bring it up so much in my own fiction and nonfiction. Mental health. That is a huge taboo. And it is a thing that is fraught with misconceptions and discrimination and prejudgment. For example, I am on mental health disability, yet I'm on CBC, like earlier today. There are other people like who write about being schizophrenic. I can't remember the name of the person, but I think it was Grey Wolf Press, that, and she talks about having to maintain a very what they call normal appearance, function as that she's functioning. And I have I understand the purpose. That is kind of like what it's kind of like trying to pass as normal, the same way a Black person would pass as white. The things that, and bringing up things about issues in regards to narratives with people of color. Pain porn, for example, the painful immigrant story, which has become such a thing that someone can just pretend to be Hispanic and get like lots of money, whereas people who are really Hispanic and have their own unique stories that don't fit what the stereotype can't get anything published, and they have to work for decades and decades, like, for example, Siva Marina Garza, she finally just broke through with Mexican Gothic. And I'm hoping that displaces that other nonsense. So more stories, stories that do not fit the mold need to be spoken of more. Stories that are considered taboo, but that should not be, like mental health. And then what I also bring in is child abuse issues that I bring in very much into my stories. That mental health and child abuse, those things need to be discussed much more. And I know there may be some issues with Bell as a company, but they are bringing a wide awareness to mental health with the Bell Let's Talk Day. And that's it.
Yes, thank you. Katie, how about you?
Yeah. Again, I feel like I'm echoing in terms of what we shouldn't tell. I think any story where it's been said, not this one, where it's either it's revered or it's sacred or it's just not for sharing. Not everything is for us to take right? And rearrange into a story of our own. So yeah, anything where it's been asked, no. And in terms of what I would like to see more of, yeah, those stories that historically we haven't gotten to hear either at all, or we've heard only in very limited and specific ways. And I think this goes back to what we were talking about earlier about dominant narratives and power dynamics, right? Because there's a reason that we haven't heard certain stories. And so I think by challenging that and starting to shine a light on them, and to Tanya's point too about mental health, and hearing those stories, we can start to challenge that power dynamic. So that's my answer.
Great. And Sonia.
I literally have nothing new to add because, yes, basically what everyone else said. As stories we shouldn't tell, stories that are not ours to tell, and not every story is ours to tell. What I'd like to see more of, more own voices, I think would be really lovely, because I mean, it's much more authentic because it is an actual related lived experience that somebody actually went through. And there's no amount of research you can do that's going to come near the sort of knowledge, in-depth knowledge of the thing that a person who is that thing would write about. So yeah, much more own voices, I think. But I mean, that's just literally what everybody else said, so I'll shut up now.
It's very hard to answer the question last when you're the last person. Is sort of like, but they said all of the good things before me. It's not fair. So I will end this because we are almost at the end now. We're at 7:57. It's like, what? Time is meaningless during the pandemic. I will end with a question that you can all answer differently. Do you have some recommendations for the audience? Who is writing great folklore / legend / whatever based stuff right now? Give us some stories to look for. And why don't we start with Tanya?
Oh boy, I'm just gonna go with the Caribbean Massive, okay? Celeste Baker, I started publishing her, and we were the first people to sort of get people writing complete patois in the SF field. So the first we started that, but I heard about her. I read her in 2013, and by 2015 we were publishing her. RSA Garcia, she is really looked over. She's starting to get her own now. She seems to be a Clarkesworld regular in terms of getting published there. Kyle Dwell Turnbull, oh my Lord. Such a great book that he has out right now. Brandon O'Brien, a Trinidadian who lives in Trinidad and is breaking out in the North American field. He is mostly does poetry. He does some theater work, I believe, in Trinidad. He writes some fiction, but I think he focuses on poetry, and he is, if I believe, still the poetry editor for Fire magazine. Terry Zinni Rockland, or Terry Zinn, somebody who is so similar to me because we both have Trinidadian ancestries. We're both born in North America. We both have mental health issues. We both write horror. We both say bub. It's scary. She has a fiction that's coming out on Tor.com and has been published on Tor.com. Really. Let me see. I know I'm forgetting somebody. Susan. She goes by Silly Syntax on
Susan
Twitter.
Colombo?
Yes, thank you.
I was gonna say Susan.
Yes. Primi Mohammed. They're both Indo-Caribbean people. And then there's Vajra, but he is sort of the editor. He's the editor of, he's one of the editors over at Strange Horizons. E.L. Chen. Yeah, that's it. That's what you need. Look for those people. They're really great.
That was a great big list. So people will have lots of things to read. Hooray. Sonia. Did Tanya take all of your choices?
No, I'm actually like chin deep in research right now, and I haven't read an awful lot of fiction. It's all been like nonfiction and academic papers. So I don't actually have anything about any fiction novels or short stories to tell you about. But I am currently obsessed with a Chinese drama that does that has a lot of like fantastical elements, obviously from it's an adaptation of a web novel, and I've raved about it so much that I think anybody who knows me who's watching this is rolling their eyes right now. But it's called The Untamed, and it's a 50-something episode series. It's free on YouTube, and if you have Netflix, it is also on Netflix, and it is stunningly beautiful and so full of queer energy, and I absolutely love it.
And you have just invoked the moderator who should have been, Rati, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, so I had to take over. She loves The Untamed.
Oh my God, it's so good.
Undying passion. Like,
yeah.
It is absolutely her thing, yes.
I want an English translation in print because I need this story on my shelf. It is genuinely beautiful.
Let's go to Katie now.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to lead off with Susan Palumbo, who's written some amazing short stories and doing some really, really cool stuff. I'd also add Stephen Graham Jones. I just finished The Only Good Indians, and it's like an amazing work. All of his novels are fantastic. And one of my old standby favorites, Theodora Goss, also does some really interesting work with immigration and folklore and weaving those narratives together.
Thank you. And we will end off with Wob.
I was going to mention Stephen Graham Jones too, so there's some synchronicities here amongst all our recommendations, which is cool. Yeah, The Only Good Indians is awesome. I think some other Indigenous authors who weave their people's old stories well into literature are Lee Maracle, of course, particularly a book called Celia's Song. So some Stolo stories in that. Richard Van Camp, he weaves Tlicho stories into his collections too, namely Godless but Loyal to Heaven, and his most recent one, Moccasin Square Gardens. And I'm currently reading Eden Robinson's Return of the Trickster, and her Trickster trilogy, of course, has lots of her people stories woven throughout. So those would be my quick recommendations to wrap it up for me. But thanks, Kari, you did a great job moderating tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you all for participating. That was a very interesting conversation. We did not see Katie's cat, which was sad, but we instead heard some very interesting things from all of you. I should end by saying that the conversation can continue on the CanCon site. There is a little room that people go to through the thing that is called Wonder, and then you log on and then you get into little groups and talk to people. And can I ask how many of you will be at that little Wonder thing after this?
Yeah, sure. I'll come for a bit.
Will be.
I didn't know about it. I'll have to ask how to get in afterwards.
People seem not to have got the email. There was an email about it, but not. I don't think Katie got that one either. It's strange.
Thank you for the Zoom link.
You were all on the email. Shania, will you be there?
Yes, I will. Yes, I will.
Okay, but Wob, you can't make it.
No, I have to put my son to bed. Sorry, everybody. Miss you.
Children come first. But thank you all, and I hope everybody out there on the YouTube in the YouTube world has a good night and enjoyed this panel, and was not sad because there were no cats. So, David, did you want to say some last words if you're still there, or do we just kind of sit here uncomfortably until the feed ends? I don't know that David is still
Thank you for looping back with me. No, I have nothing new to add. This was a great panel. Thank you all very much. I have moved into a dark part of my apartment. Do go and visit the lounge on the CanCon site that Kari has described. It is a lot of fun. It's also a place where we meet up from time to time to have silent writing or to gossip, things like that. And look for more of these panels. They're going to be coming up throughout the year, and we will be tweeting about them. You'll find out about them on social media and also through the CanCon emails that come out from time to time. That's it.
Thank you. And good night, everybody. I think that's it. And I think we'll just all wave goodbye. Keep waving goodbye. I'm going to take a picture of us all waving goodbye. If I can do that. Come on, print screen. Print screen. Come on. There I go. There it happened. It's probably very awkward, but all right. We will end just by ending, and it was nice to meet all of you, and we'll see you on the other side if you're going.
Thank you very much.
See you all. Thank you so much,
Bye.
everyone.
Thank you. Bye.